It is time. It is time to put an end to the broken system in Washington that is breaking the American economy. It's time for change that makes real difference in your lives. It's time for a government that is fighting for you, not ignoring you or fighting against you. We need leadership like the governor in Colorado is providing to build a new energy economy. We need leadership like the mayor's providing, investing in infrastructure and education. That's the kind of leadership we need in Washington and in the White House. That's what I intend to provide. We need common sense, practical leadership, and economic stewardship that focuses on the American people. And if you want to understand the difference between how Senator McCain and I would govern as president, you can start by taking a look at how we've responded to this crisis. Because Senator McCain's approach was the same as the Bush administration's: support ideological policies that made the crisis more likely, do nothing as the crisis hits, and then scramble as the whole thing unravels. Now, my approach has been to try to prevent this turmoil from occurring in the first place. In February of 2006, I introduced legislation to stop mortgage transactions that promoted fraud, risk, or abuse. A year later, before the crisis hit, I warned Secretary Paulson at the Treasury and Chairman Bernanke of the Fed about the risks of mounting foreclosures and urged them to bring together all the stakeholders to find solutions to the subprime mortgage meltdown. Senator McCain did nothing. Last September, I stood up at NASDAQ and said it's time to realize that we are in this together, that there is no dividing line between Wall Street and Main Street, and warned of a growing loss of trust in our capital markets. Months later, Senator McCain told a newspaper that he'd love to give them a solution to the mortgage crisis, but, and I quote, "I don't know one." In January, I outlined a plan to help revive our faltering economy, which formed the basis for a bipartisan stimulus package that passed the Congress. Senator McCain used the crisis as an excuse to push a so-called stimulus plan that offered another huge and permanent corporate tax cut, including $4 billion for the big oil companies, but no immediate help for workers. This March, in the wake of the Bear Stearns bailout, I called for a new 21st century regulatory framework to restore accountability, transparency, and trust in our financial markets. Just a few weeks earlier, Senator McCain made it clear where he stands. Quote, "I'm always for less regulation," unquote, and referred to himself as, quote, "fundamentally a deregulator." This is what happens when you confuse the free market with a free license to let special interests take whatever they get, however they can get it. This is what happens when you see 7 years of incomes falling for the average worker while Wall Street is booming, and declare, as Senator McCain did earlier this year, that we've made great economic progress under George Bush. This is how you can reach the conclusion as late as yesterday that the fundamentals of the economy are strong. Well, we have a different way of measuring the fundamentals of our economy. We know that the fundamentals that we use to measure economic strength are whether we're living up to that fundamental promise that has made this country great, that America is a place where you can make it if you try. Americans have always pursued our dreams within a free market that has been the engine of our progress. It's a market that's created a prosperity that is the envy of the world and rewarded the innovators and the risk takers who've made America a beacon of science and technology and discovery. But the American economy has worked in large part because we have guided the market's invisible hand with a higher principle, that America prospers when all Americans can prosper. That's what we believe. That's why we have put in place rules of the road to make competition fair and honest and open. And too often over the last quarter century, we have lost this sense of shared prosperity. And this has not happened by accident. It's because of decisions made in boardrooms, on trading floors, and in Washington. We failed to guard against practices that all too often rewarded financial manipulation instead of productivity and sound business practices. We let the special interests put their thumbs on the economic scales. The result's been a distorted market that creates bubbles instead of steady, sustainable growth. A market that favors Wall Street over Main Street but ends up hurting both. Let me be clear, the American economy does not stand still, and neither should the rules that govern it. The evolution of industries and new financial instruments often warrants regulatory reform to foster competition and lower prices or to replace outdated oversight structures. Old institutions cannot adequately oversee new practices. Old rules may not fit the roads where our economy is leading. But instead of sensible reform that rewarded success and freed the creative forces of the market, too often we've excused an ethic of greed, corner cutting, and inside dealing that threatens the long-term stability of our economic system. Now, remember, we've seen this before. It happened in the 1980s when we loosened restrictions on savings and loans and appointed regulators who ignored even these weaker rules. Too many S&Ls took advantage of the lax rules set by Washington to gamble that they could make big money in speculative real estate. Confident of their clout in Washington, they made hundreds of billions in bad loans, knowing that if they lost money, the government would bail them out. And they were right. The gambles did not pay off, our economy went into recession, and the taxpayers ended up footing the bill. Does that sound familiar? It happened again during this decade, in part because of how we deregulated the financial services sector. After we repealed outmoded rules instead of updating them, we were left overseeing 21st century innovation with 20th century regulations. When subprime mortgage lending took a reckless and unsustainable turn, a patchwork of regulators systematically and deliberately eliminated the regulations protecting the American people, and they failed to raise warning flags that could have protected investors and pensions American workers count on. This was not the invisible hand of the market at work. These cycles of bubble and bust were symptoms of an ideology that my opponent is running to continue. John McCain has spent decades in Washington supporting financial institutions instead of their customers. In fact, one of the biggest proponents of deregulation in the financial sector is Phil Gramm. This is the man who helped write John McCain's economic plan, the same man who said that we're going through a mental recession, the same man who called the United States of America a nation of whiners. So it's hard to understand how Senator McCain is going to get us out of this crisis by doing the same things with the same old players. Make no mistake, my opponent is running for 4 more years of policies that will throw the economy further out of balance. His outrage at Wall Street would be more convincing if he wasn't offering them more tax cuts. His call for fiscal responsibility would be believable if he wasn't for more tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans and more of a $1 trillion war in Iraq paid for with deficit spending and borrowing from foreign creditors like China.